The War Within is currently winding down, and honestly, Mythic Plus has been great this expansion as a whole, but right now, it's hard to even get a group going. LFG is omega quiet, groups are really picky, and this results in literal hours sitting in queue just waiting to play the game. This happens at the end of every season, but if you're like me and just love running keys year round, this part of the patch cycle sucks. So in this video, I wanted to break down why end of season Mythic Plus feels so miserable, and a few changes that Blizzard could potentially make to keep participation healthier all season long. Now, a drop-off is pretty natural across a season. A lot of players don't play WoW all season long, but I think the end of expansion drop-off is particularly worth noting. A person on the competitive WoW subreddit named Zamisa, sorry if I butchered that, has been posting M+ run data for years now, and as you can see, War Within Season 3 is almost half of the participation at this current time compared to Season 1 and Season 2. This is actually a fairly common occurrence. The Dragonflight data actually looked pretty much identical to this as well. I think there's a few big driving forces behind this trend. Firstly, and most obviously, most people don't want to play M+ month after month. That's pretty normal, so the downwards trend is not that surprising. On top of this though, as the season progresses, the player pool will naturally drift apart from one another. Let's think about it like this. If I draw a line ranging all the way from +2s to title range keys, this is what will happen as the season moves along. At the start, everyone is condensed in these lower sections, farming gear, playing the game for fun. As time goes on, better players will naturally gravitate towards the upper end of the line, and interest in the lower keys will also drop off because the gear there isn't relevant anymore. So we end up with this distribution. No one running at the lower end, a cluster of people doing weekly keys for gear around like the +10 to 12 range, another dead space, and then a small cluster in the title range area. Now, there's a big issue here. Majority of the really good players will end up this end. So what can happen is this post 3k zone here can feel miserable since a lot of the really talented players have already moved up to this area here. You run into this effect when people are trying to break out of like this +12 region. They try some slightly higher keys, and then they find them appalling because the player count is low and the people in that sort of region are generally not quite as good as the people that have already moved on. But these are just secondary factors. I think there's two main pain points that really hurt season-wide participation in Mythic Plus. The first, there's very little incentive to push past a certain point. A lot of people do it for pure enjoyment, like me, but at the moment, there is this absolute chasm between Keystone Legend at 3k and the 0.1% title. For reference, 3k is currently a mix of +12s and +13s, whereas title keys are around the +20 to 21 mark. It probably doesn't need to be said, but the difference between these two levels is so massive, and it's so big that most players won't even attempt to try and bridge that gap. The second biggest factor, I think, is the repetitiveness of keys. While I think that resilient keys and the removal of weekly affixes has largely been positive, it has led to this situation where keys can just feel identical week to week. This is great for consistency when trying to progress high-level keys, but it does get very old very fast for majority of the player base. You add it all together and Mythic Plus starts to feel miserable, especially if you're mainly pugging. All of these issues sort of compound on one another. They lead to this borderline dead LFG queue. People quit because they can't play the game, and then the queue becomes even more dead, and the cycle just spirals out of control. Now, I don't want to make this video just a whine fest. I did want to discuss some ideas that I think might be helpful if something like them got introduced down the line. One big thing would be to incentivize pushing past the 3k or vault key mark. Blizzard seems to already be shooting for this next expansion with the changes to the Great Vault. For those who haven't seen, Great Vault gear will have better upgrade path improvements all the way up to a +18 next patch. So this will mean that players will be incentivized to push beyond that normal +12 mark for crests. This is a good change, I think, but it's definitely not an overarching fix to the problem. An idea that I think would be really cool is something like the PvP gladiator mounts at the moment. The system could work something like this. At the moment, the top 1% of the player base in Mythic Plus is roughly 3.5k. So similar to PvP, a system could be implemented where every key completed that is above that 3.5k mark counts towards a progress bar, where afterwards you'd receive a cool mount and a title. I think this is exactly how PvP operates now. You would still retain the 0.1% title for psychos like me who want it, but you'd also add incentive for players to push past the 3k mark. This would also have the added bonus of keeping more talented players in that sort of middle dead section, because even title range players will want to complete as many of these 3.5k keys as possible, since pushing at a higher end typically results in lots of bricks and incomplete keys. Dropping back to run some, say, 15 or 16s or whatever key level fits that bracket would actually have a purpose. On top of this, I think keeping a fresher rotation of dungeons is a smart idea. I get that community voting for returning dungeons is cool, but the player base are idiots, and from what we've seen this season, the return of Priory and Floodgate simply because everyone wanted the trinkets was a terrible idea. They didn't even end up being the best trinkets, which is the worst part. So we've had these two dungeons in back-to-back seasons with only minor changes, and to boot, they're also the two hardest dungeons from a high-end pushing point of view. Honestly, I'd probably just remove community voting for returning dungeons, maybe just pick the top two most popular based on like community sentiment, or better yet, just give us more reworks of dungeons that we haven't seen for a while, similar to like Halls of Atonement at the moment. Lastly, while I think weekly affix has been removed was a great thing for consistency, I wonder whether adding back in some sort of seasonal affix might be a really positive thing to do. This way, if dungeons are repeated, there is at least some sort of additional mechanic that mixes things up a little bit. If we think back to Shadowlands Season 1, we had the Prideful affix, which I thought was really fun at the time. Basically gave you a buff when you killed a mob that would spawn based on like the trash percentages. So adding something like this in, say, in the current season would force your routing to change because you would want to hit certain percentage breakpoints to get the Prideful mob to spawn at certain times. So just an idea though, I'm sure there's plenty of other things that would work. Just something which isn't like super oppressive, but still requires a little bit of coordination and just mixes up dungeons, especially if they are repeated. I think more importantly though, I'd recommend to players who are still trying to push keys to just expand what they're doing in the game a little bit. When the season dies down, surfing LFG just sort of becomes inevitable. So filling the time while you're waiting for keys is definitely the move. In game, I really like to run old dungeons for transmog, or if there's nothing in LFG, just queue up for like random BGs and just try and dome people for 5 or 10 minutes. You can also play games on like your second monitor. Old school RuneScape is a personal pick for me with this. On top of this though, you don't always need to do keys for score. If you're looking for a key to increase your IO and you don't see anything, but there's something in the LFG that's like 3 or 4 levels lower than what you actually need, just sign up and play. You really don't know whose day you might brighten up by helping with their key, and plus you actually get to play the game, which is what we all actually enjoy doing. Let me know in the comments what you think Blizzard could do to make M+ a little bit more fun across the entirety of a season. On a side note, I wanted to give a quick preview of the Boggs Adventures website that will be available in the next few weeks. It looks really ugly at the moment. I'm not a web designer, but I'm currently working on this comp builder thing that shows party utility and damage profiles and survivability based on which specs you select in your group. I'm also going to include something around like the most important utility based on the dungeon that you select. This website is also going to include things like dungeon cheat sheets and class guides. So if you're interested in seeing where this goes, drop a subscribe and I'll keep everyone posted. A big thank you to my channel members, Mr. Ghost Splinter in the Keystone Legend category, and everybody else listed on screen. If you want to support the channel, click the join button below and check out the different options. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, gamers, take care.